The title of tonight's talk is Fire, Salt, Ceramics, and Commerce on the Pacific Coast of Southern Mesoamerica. Dr. Hector Neff is Professor Emeritus of Anthropology at California State University, Long Beach. His research interests include the application of geothermal, geochemical characterization to artifact provenience, archaeology of Southern Mesoamerica, and paleo-environmental reconstruction. He has carried out fieldwork in Chiapas, Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and most recently in the Lakes Basin on the Pacific coast of northwestern Nicaragua. He is the author of Fire and Salt, the Human Niche Construction and Holocene Landscape Evolution on the Pacific coast of Southern Mesoamerica. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Hector Neff. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen, and you can confirm, if you will, that you're seeing the title slide. Is that right?
We see the title slide.
Okay, great. I think we're off then. One other thing I want to do, let me see if I can get this laser pointer going. You see a laser pointer too?
Laser pointer, bright red.
Yeah, right. Okay, great. Well, I guess I'm ready to go then. As you can see, this is sort of a two-part talk. The first part is going to focus on some work that I did between 2011 and 2019 in far southern Chiapas, Mexico. Part of which involved generating some new information on the pottery type called Plumbate pottery, of which you can see two examples on the title slide here. And Plumbate is it's since 1839, really, when Stevens and Catherwood first opened a tomb at Zaculeo in the western highlands of Guatemala. This ware has really captured the interest of Mesoamericanists, partly because of its unique glaze technology, and also because of its extremely wide distribution in space. It essentially reached all corners of Mesoamerica and even beyond. Well, Joe did it for me, but I thought I'd put a plug in for a book that was published last year by University of New Mexico Press, this Fire and Salt, which reports in a lot more detail some of the results that I'm going to be presenting in the first part of this talk tonight. So over the course of really almost 100 years now, since Shepard, Anna O. Shepard, started studying Plumbate, the source of this unique pottery has become more and more clear. Shepard and Shook speculated that it might have been made on the Pacific coast near the current border between Mexico and Guatemala. And then in 1984, I analyzed some byproducts of ceramic manufacture from a small site in far southwestern Guatemala, and this analysis showed that the byproduct matched the compositional profile of San Juan Plumbate. So, that was kind of confirmation of Shepard and Shook's hypothesis. And then in in the late 1990s, I did some raw material survey that essentially recovered clays that matched the two compositional profiles of Plumbate. And then most recently, it's partly covered up by the at least on my banner here, by the Zoom options at the bottom. But most recently, I have reported evidence from this project in coastal southern Chiapas that we apparently found some factories, essentially places where plumbate pottery was made and presumably exported from there. But since those publications, and part of my theme today is that I think the idea that you know, sort of high-tech ceramic factories on the lower coast of Chiapas produce this ware that spread throughout Mesoamerica. I think there's more to the picture, and that's partly what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So here's the area that I've been working in, or that I worked in from 2011 to 2019. The Rio Suchiate, which you can see here, is the border between Mexico and Guatemala. There's this fairly famous archaeological site, a large ceremonial center up on the Piedmont, roughly 40 kilometers in from the beach, that seems to have an occupation that goes all the way through from the early formative period all the way to Aztec times. The area that I worked is this area outlined in green. Again, it's covered up, at least on my display, by the Zoom banner at the bottom, partly covered up. But it's a mangrove zone characterized by lagoons and rivers flowing through the estuary. This is the zone actually where one of the plumbate clay sources is known to exist. The Rio Cahuacan comes down here, and then just to the west of where the Rio Cahuacan enters the Pacific Ocean, in this area right around here is the plumbate clay source, as well as a number of these pyrotechnological installations where I believe they were making plumbate. The work was based on a LiDAR survey. A mangrove swamp, of course, is an almost impossible environment to survey systematically because of the thickness of the mangrove trees. So in 2011, we had a LiDAR mission flown over a 54 square kilometer area that you can see here. On the left is the raw digital elevation model derived from the LiDAR data. Up here you can see the Rio Cahuacan, and you can just barely see the edge of the Rio Suchiate down here, which is the international border. And then on the right here, you can see a blown-up version of ground shade image taken from the LiDAR data from a small section showing all of the mounds that in this fairly small section. We actually identified something like 215 mounds in the whole area that we thought were archaeological mounds, and it turned out that essentially all of them were. And they range in size, as you can see from this image. But again, this is a really dense mangrove forest. We've never could have possibly identified all of these archaeological sites without LiDAR. Here's the chronological chart showing Mesoamerican periods over on the left here. And then the second column is the phases from Izapa, the large site on the Piedmont, going from early formative all the way up to Aztec times. And you have the dates. And then here you have the ceramic complexes that we've identified within the Proyecto Arqueológico Costa del Soconusco study area. And as you can see, there are two sort of gaps in the chronology. Over here are kind of really brief statements of what people apparently were doing during the different periods. And as you can see, these are the two terms that I'm using here are sol solar and sol cocida. The first is making salt by solar evaporation, and the second, sol cocida, is making salt by brine boiling, essentially. And as you can see, for pretty much the entire prehistory of this zone, salt production was the main economic activity of people who worked in the littoral zone. The big kind of anomaly up here, which I'm sort of getting at one of the main themes I'm going to be talking about, is this La Gloria complex. It's late and terminal classic period ceramic complex that they were producing a lot of plumbate, but it might be more complicated than just a bunch of specialized plumbate craft production centers, as you'll see. So for the early formative, I have to thank Jimmy Daniels, who is actually listening tonight for this information. He excavated a couple of sites in the study area, including this one that's shown on the left here, the site of El Castaño. And among other things, he found maybe 30 some odd superimposed basins in this 8-meter deep archaeological deposit, virtually all of which was early formative. And we believe these basins, these sort of shallow basins, were part of were essentially features that were used in the production of salt, probably for preserving estuarine foods such as shellfish and shrimp and so on to be carried inland. And in part, that's based on ethnographic work in Michoacan, shown on the right here, where solar evaporation salt ponds tend to be kind of like what Jimmy found at El Castaño, these low earthen basins. So it starts out that people producing salt by solar evaporation. At least that's our working hypothesis for the moment. Then by the end of the early formative period or beginning of the middle formative period, roughly 900 BC, 1000 BC to 900 BC, we'd see evidence of a fairly abrupt change to production of salt by brine boiling, that sol cocida technique. And the earliest features we have that from the middle formative or very end of the early formative that were used in this salt production activity are these sort of hourglass shaped basins that you can see over on the bottom right here. Where this one happens to have been right on the forest floor. We excavated a series of these at one of those mounds, but this particular one was right on the forest floor, and it looked about like this when we found it. And inside, we found a whole bunch of these odd, coarse, thickened base potsherds, kind of like this first one over here, that we call campesina brown coarse. They all just filled up this firing feature. The reddened clay around it indicates the heat that it was exposed to. And I think actually, it turns out that the diameters of these big sherds make them just about the right size to fit on this sort of narrowed area at the middle of this firing feature, so that they could be supported and wood could be, additional fuel could be pushed in from either side. And at the site where we excavated a series of these, you can see one other feature of these sol cocida salt production assemblages, which is that there's a super dominance, and this lasts through other periods as well. A super dominance of brine boiling vessels. These are the brine boiling vessels, and they far outnumber all other types of pottery in this excavation at Conch 18 Area 3, as you can see here, and that carries through. That's one of the hallmarks of brine boiling salt production assemblages, that there's one main vessel shape, or sometimes a couple for carrying brine as well as boiling brine that just dominate the salt production assemblages. The late formative period from roughly 8,400 to 8,100 or so is well, I call it peak salt. Essentially, almost every single site that we excavated, if it didn't have late formative Bermudas complex material on the surface, it had a core. There might have been later material on the surface, but in many cases it covered a core, a mound core containing overlapping firing features like you see here, and together with abundant brine boiling and brine carrying vessels and so on. So this is by far the most widespread ceramic complex in the whole region. The red triangles are terminal formative sites, and as you can see, there are many fewer terminal formative sites. They're salt production sites, but they're pretty much all concentrated in the sort of southern part of the study area. And so that terminal formative complex, we call it the Soledad complex. And one of the main things that happens between late formative and terminal formative is that the quality of the salt boiling vessels really declines dramatically, as if they were made intentionally just to be used one time. These are some examples of the rims from these salt production vessels. But you can see them here. They're very crude, poorly fired, and you almost only find rims. I think most of the rest of the vessels have disintegrated. And so the terminal formative was a time of contraction in the number of sites, but also a time of sort of decline in the quality of the toolkit used to produce salt. So this is the terminal formative period here. These are our radiocarbon dates. And then you notice there's this red rectangle represents a period of roughly 250 years when we have no radiocarbon dates and we don't have any ceramic assemblage that we think might fit into that region. So this seems to be our first big gap in the chronology of the mangrove region due south of Izapa. And incidentally, the chronological chronology is not super well worked out at Izapa, but it appears that the early classic and into the middle classic were periods of very low population at Izapa as well. So what it looks like is that the salt production industry kind of collapsed because there was a demographic collapse on the coastal plain of the consumers of the salt. But then around AD 450, another ceramic complex, also a salt production complex called the Las Brisas complex, can be identified exclusively in archaeological sites to the west of the Rio Cahuacan. And I'm going to show you some of those now. So yeah, so there was this terminal formative sort of demographic contraction. then the demographic recovery starting around AD 450 in the area west of the Rio Calocan. As you can see, here's a little piece of the Rio Calocan down here. And all of these sites are, the ones with arrows are ones that we excavated, but they all essentially have the La Gloria complex on the surface. Those are the plumbate production centers. And but the middle classic Las Brisas complex is best defined from an excavation we did here at this small site called CAH-10 or Cahuacan 10. One feature I want to point out too is this sort of rectangular feature it's a rectangular embayment, actually, is what it is, where the mangrove swamp meets the banana plantations. These are the banana plantations. But this rectangular feature, the clays that we sampled from the edge of this rectangular embayment match the toe-heel plumbate compositional profile. So what we think is that this is where they were mining the clay to produce the plumbate that I'm going to talk about that was consumed here, but also plumbate that was consumed across the coastal plain and that was produced or that was consumed farther afield and, you know, in all corners of Mesoamerica, as I said previously. And all of these mounds that you see here that are adjacent to the plumbate clay source have La Gloria complex remains on their surfaces. In other words, you know, lots of broken plumbate pots and some other tools that I'll be showing you in a minute. So here's CAH-10. We chose it originally because we thought it would be a little site with lots of you know, depth to the plumbate production levels and so on. So we put in a 1 by 4 meter trench kind of across the site. And we were a little bit disappointed, not really, but it turned out that the La Gloria complex, the plumbate levels, were just the very top, essentially from the string on up. From the string down are the remains of the Las Brisas complex, this earlier middle classic ceramic complex that is clearly a salt production complex, and I'll show you why I say that in a minute. But so we got 2 radiocarbon dates. These are our 2 radiocarbon dates for the Las Brisas complex. They're separated by almost a meter, but they're almost identical. I didn't write them down here, but they both of them clearly support a beginning of middle classic salt production at around AD 450 and continuing to probably till AD 550. So here's the main component of the Las Brisas complex. These Cahuacan coarse salt production vessels. As I said before, all of these sal cocida or brine boiling assemblages are dominated by a single vessel class. In this case, pretty much all of them appear to have been for brine boiling. And some of the other assemblages have additional shapes for carrying brine and pouring and so on. But so Cahuacan coarse is the main component of this Las Brisas complex deposit. It's super abundant. I don't have the figures right with me on how the weights that we recovered, but it was a lot. And we actually analyzed some of these sherds by, or I think actually only 1 or 2, we analyzed by neutron activation analysis. And it turned out to match that the profile of toe-heel plumbate, which again, we believe was being mined at that rectangular embayment into the banana fields just inland from the mangrove swamp. Other components of the Las Brisas complex include salt production tools, these sort of brick-like large cylindrical solid fired clay pieces that, you know, they have notched ends in all cases. I'm not sure exactly how they might have been used. Other solid fired clay features that appear to be possibly spacers or supports of some kind. So it's a, you know, it's a fairly, it's, I should say too, that it's the Las Brisas complex, like many of these other Salcosita assemblages, have very little other than fired clay implements. There's a little bit of obsidian, but really not very much. You know, and few ground tools too, and faunal remains are not particularly abundant, which you know, suggests that people probably were not actually residing at these sites for, you know, multiple days or weeks at a time, but they were traveling to them to work. Besides the Cahuacan course and those solid salt production tools, there are serving vessels in the Las Brisas complex. It's a much smaller proportion of the entire complex, but they almost all tend to be these globular bowls with direct rims, with polished exteriors, polished and incised exteriors. A lot of them are dark brown, a lot of them are more orange, and so on. We also analyzed some of these by neutron activation analysis, and they too, although some appear to have been imported, several of them match the Tohil Plumbate clay source compositionally. So the Las Brisas complex then is kind of develops right into the La Gloria complex, which follows it fairly closely in time. Our earliest La Gloria date, you know, in other words, associated with Plumbate vessels, is between, you know, falls between about 8600 and 8660, I think. And there seems to be continuity in the shapes. These are all plumbate vessels. Chemically, they're plumbate, but they also have the very distinctive plumbate glazed finish. And you can see that the shapes are fairly similar to the serving vessels of the preceding Las Brisas complex, although these are a little bit more open rather than incurving at the rim. So there's continuity in the serving vessel forms. There's also continuity in the solid ceramic firing tools. They changed somewhat. The dominant form becomes these solid fired clay cylinders, which range in size from these fairly large ones over here on the left to to smaller ones that you can see over on the right. So in many respects, the La Gloria complex seems to represent a, you know, a development or you know, a development out of the earlier Las Brisas complex. The vessel forms and the tool types continue, but one big difference is that that there are no coarse brine boiling vessels. You know, that component of the assemblage, which is so dominant in other other Salcosita assemblages, is not there. Instead, however, the Tohil Plumbate, in other words, these vessels up here, especially direct rim hemispherical bowls, but some other shapes as well, they are super abundant on virtually all of the mounds to the west of the Rio Cahuacan. So you know, and so that's part of the reason why I, you know, started to think that these were plumbate production sites, that there were so many plumbate sherds. which I'll come back to in a minute. In addition to the abundant plumbate and solid cylinders, other components of the La Gloria pyrotechnological toolkit include these tubo brown sherds, which I've never found a base. I don't think bases exist, but the rims are always very well preserved. So my best hypothesis about these is that they were used as to sort of control the temperature and atmosphere inside of fires, essentially, either firing, for boiling brine or for ceramic production. So there's these. There's also, I think we found a total of 4 kiln chimneys. These are Tecomate-like rims, but the size is probably only about 15 centimeters in diameter at the most. So I think what they are is fragments of chimneys that would have been placed over a fire. We also found a number of these sherd scrapers made on plumbate sherds, which our initial thought was that they were used for shaping plumbate vessels during the production of plumbate pottery. But we found similar implements there with sort of ground edges, sherds with ground edges that had clearly been worked. And we found those in late formative Bermudas complex, where I believe that in that case they're used for removing salt from brine boiling vessels. So that's a possible interpretation of these late classic La Gloria sherds as well, these work sherds. We found all those components of the La Gloria complex inside of firing features too. Here, this one has those solid cylinders in an upright position, seemingly confirming that they were used as supports of some kind. But this feature also had, well, as you can see down here, these were all removed from the interior of this firing feature. So here's a solid cylinder caked with what it is it's a natural cement that formed from the burned down wood ash, calcite in the wood ash, which combined with silicates from the soil and water and formed really a concrete. You can't chip it off. It's really a really hard concrete. And so that the concrete coats the solid cylinder, this plumbate sherd, this other solid cylinder. This is actually a lump of that concrete with several tubo brown sherds embedded in the concrete, and then over here is another plumbate sherd. So these this and other firing features that we encountered in our excavations were essentially what led me to hypothesize that these are plumbate factories. There's lots of broken plumbate around. It's clear that they were firing things within these features, and the solid cylinders were apparently used within the firing features too, as were the tubo brown. So this was interpreted as a plumbate production toolkit, essentially in those 2 publications cited at the bottom there. And so in the 9 excavations where we dug into the sites with this La Gloria complex on the surface, we found a really close correlation between the amount of plumbate, in this case weight of plumbate, the solid lines, and the weight of solid cylinders. That's the dotted lines in each of these. And as you can see, they're very closely associated. Not only are they closely associated, but the amounts in some cases are just pretty staggering. In this case, we have 10 kilograms of both essentially from a single 20 centimeter level in a 2x2. So again, my interpretation to begin with was that that these are plumbate production assemblages, and I said that in print. But the traditional interpretation, and there's a series of citations there of investigators who have used this interpretation, is that at salt production sites with solid cylinders, and they occur elsewhere. They occur along the Pacific coast, but also in Belize. And the usual interpretation is that the dominant vessel class are the brine boiling vessels, and then the solid cylinders and other kind of amorphous fired pieces of clay are essentially tools to support or keep space between vessels within a brine boiling fire. So, applying the same logic to these assemblages from west of the Rio Cahuacan, I started to wonder if maybe the plumbate was, where there's no coarse brine boiling vessel. So I started to wonder if maybe the plumbate was used for brine boiling. It's an alternative interpretation, which I'll call it a multi-crafting interpretation. So, here I'm kind of contrasting the two frameworks for understanding what went on at these sites. And one of them, under one scenario, my favorite one to begin with, they were plumbate factories. And the other possibility, though, favored by most other people who have excavated salt production sites, is that they could have been multi-crafting sites. So let's look at each of these features, and see and ask how they line up with one interpretation or the other. And so, under plumbate, the pyrotechnological focus of these sites clearly is consistent with viewing them as plumbate factories. There's lots of evidence of soil, of fuel wood being burned and the soil being reddened and hardened and so on. So that's consistent with the plumbate factories, but the pyrotechnological focus is also consistent with the hypothesis that they were both salt production and plumbate production sites. Clearly, since these firing sites are close to the Tohil plumbate clay source, that rectangular embayment, that is consistent with these being plumbate production facilities. But as I pointed out, that this source, the Tohil clay source, was also used during the Middle Classic, both for serving vessels and for the large brine boiling vessels that we called Cahuacan course. And now, so the third point here, though, is kind of the kicker, in my opinion. My original interpretation, of course, is that the abundant broken plumbate on these sites, many of which are wasters, overfired, possibly, and so on, is consistent. That marks these as plumbate production factories. But then, it occurred to me, well, why did they break? Why were there so many wasters then? Why did they break so many pieces of pottery in making plumbate? They apparently were very inept potters, if plumbate was the intended end product. But if on the other hand, if the plumbate was being made to be used in salt production, that repeated firing that these vessels would have to undergo would be, that's what in the multi-crafting hypothesis, that makes perfect sense. There's a lot of broken plumbate because plumbate was being used in, carrying brine, pouring brine, storing brine, boiling brine, and so on. And that's what led to the large, concentrations of plumbate pottery on the surfaces of these sites. Another thing about the plumbate factories interpretation is that they'd be historically anomalous. The eastern Soconusco wetlands had been dedicated to salt production by brine boiling from the middle to terminal formative, essentially, 900 BC through 250 AD, and then also during the Middle Classic, and then later on during historic times, there's another brine boiling industry that starts up, which I'm not going to go into today. And all of these other salt cosita complexes have, large numbers of broken brine boiling vessels, transport vessels, and associated tools, just like the La Gloria complex. But the La Gloria complex does have a super dominant vessel class, but it's a vessel class that it's sort of hard for us to accept was used in a purely utilitarian way to produce pottery. To produce salt. The superabundant pottery is plumbate, not the coarse vessels that you see in other brine boiling assemblages. And that then brings me to another, to a kind of an obscure article that more obscure than even most of mine, that I published in 2009, which reported the results of laser ablation ICP-MS analysis of plumbate surfaces that showed that alkalis and alkaline earths, sodium, potassium, and calcium in particular, are very concentrated on the surfaces of plumbate vessels, and but below the surface, the concentration of these elements declines, and that is consistent with the interpretation of plumbate surfaces that glaze as an alkaline glaze, and that's what I suggested in this 2009 paper, that plumbate technology was discovered in the context of producing salt by burning mangrove wood, which would burn down to a high potassium, high calcium powder, and then there would have been sodium from the brine boiling in the environment. So those conditions led to the realization by somebody that those conditions created this very unique, shiny, hard surface. So to sort of combine the results of that 2009 study with the fieldwork results that I've discussed here, this discovery would have, in a sense, opened up two new opportunities for middle to late classic pyrotechnologists working in this zone. One, of course, would have been to exploit the regional demand and eventually the interregional demand for these plumbate vessels, which had such technologically unique, attractive features. So that's one opportunity, but then another opportunity that suggested by the results that I've presented here is it opened up an opportunity to exploit the superior heat transfer of these glazed, thin, dense plumbate vessels, which enhance the efficiency of fuel use during brine boiling by, transferring heat from the exterior to the interior of the vessel to the boiling brine. And plumbate also would have tolerated repeated use in brine boiling better than the coarse vessels that it replaced, thus offsetting the initial greater investment in vessel production. So that's my current hypothesis. Some of my colleagues are trying to look at this possibility that plumbate was initially kind of a salt glaze. I have some colleagues who are exploring that possibility. Here are the acknowledgements for the first section of the talk. The next section isn't quite as long, but if people are getting tired, I can stop here. Anybody Joe, do you have any? What do you think?
No, we have time. I'd love to hear some more if that's okay with you.
Okay, okay. Like I said, I hope this doesn't, the next part doesn't take quite as long. Okay, this second part is about some results from Pacific Nicaragua. Here we've been talking about this area right along the Pacific coast of far southern Chiapas and Guatemala. There are other brine boiling sites all along the coast of Guatemala, some of which have been investigated. There's also one that has been excavated by a Japanese group in El Salvador. And then on an island off the sort of north shore of the Gulf of Fonseca here, this Isla Huehuense, Claude Baudez in the 1970s reported a number of what he interpreted as brine boiling sites. And what he describes is very similar to what I'm going to show you in just a few minutes from this site of Ruben-Darío Locus B, actually. So here is Pacific Nicaragua. It's the Ruben-Darío site is in the Estero Real region that empties into the Gulf of Fonseca here. And so those are the results I'm going to show you. There are other sites known from the coast of Nicaragua, not many of which have been investigated too much. Unfortunately, it got covered up on my screen by the banner now. But down here, there's another site called Brito, which was investigated during the archaeological investigation in advance of the construction of the interoceanic canal in 2015, which of course that canal has never been built. It probably never will be built. But anyway, so some of the results I'm going to show are from the Ometepe Island here as well. So those are the two places we'll be focusing on for Nicaragua. Here's the Ruben-Darío Locus B. As you can see, it's a rectangular feature, a rectangular trench, essentially, that seems to have been abandoned after its last use, with the wood left there. I'll show you some remains of wood impressions, but there were brine boiling vessels in the fill as well. And this rectangular feature is very similar to what Baudez
We lost your sound.
You can't hear me? You hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just got a message that my internet connection is unstable. Maybe that's what it was. Can you hear me still?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Well, what I was saying is that this rectangular feature is very similar to what Claude Baudez describes for that Isla Huehuense, that island in the Gulf of Fonseca. And here's a drawing of the feature. It's a rectangular trench about 4 to 4.3 meters long by about a meter wide and 50 to 60 centimeters deep. And we excavated a trench. Well, we first excavated a shovel test here, but then eventually we excavated a trench across here. And we also sampled for geochemical analysis across the long axis, but also across the short axis. And I'll show you some of those results in just a minute. Interestingly, my colleague Cliff Brown defined a salt boiling vessel type as mostly from this site, but also from other sites nearby that he surface collected that he calls ware, Mahagua type. And these are very similar to what Baudez describes from that Huehuense island in Honduras, but also they're very similar to the Cahuacan coarse vessels. The shapes are very similar, and the sort of squared off rim is very similar. So it's not out of the question to think that these were these salt producers shared techniques up and down the Pacific coast. Here are some of the impressions of the fuel wood that was burned during the last use of this feature. At first we thought they were tubes running through the contents of the trench, but ultimately I think it's pretty clear that they're the negative impressions of fuel wood in clay and clay mixed with ash, and that's what we're seeing here. So just briefly here's the magnetic and geochemical signatures of salcosita production. The magnetic susceptibility drops dramatically within the trench itself. Aluminum, iron, and silicon are much higher outside the trench and then drop to very low levels within the trench at the same time that, can you hear me? Sorry. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
somebody doesn't, it's not on mute. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, and then the calcium and phosphorus, while the other elements are dropping inside the trench, the calcium and phosphorus are increasing dramatically inside the trench. So the main reason to show this is that for the purposes of recognizing salt production firing features from surface remains, if you aren't able to excavate it, you can sample for X-ray fluorescence analysis across them, and this is what I would expect to see, some of these geochemical footprints. Okay, so the very last thing to mention here is a study being carried out by UCSD PhD student named Chad Rankel in Pacific Nicaragua, in which he's using strontium isotopes in dental enamel to assess the possibility that people were moving around between different regions in Pacific Nicaragua. This technique of strontium isotope analysis has been used with increasing frequency for looking at human movement recently. The basis for it is that different geological formations have different strontium isotope ratios, and in part determined by their age. Very young rocks have higher strontium-87. I'm sorry, lower strontium-87 compared to strontium-86. So that's the basis for it. And so the way Chad designed his project is he first collected baseline samples, and the blue dots on the map over here are locations of the baseline samples. And as you can see, they're mostly from the Pacific side of Nicaragua. We did go to, you know, east and north of the lakes a little bit, but most of them are from the Pacific side. And as you can see, the yellow are fairly young volcanic rocks and quaternary alluvium and so on. So most of the area is fairly young. And as you'll see, there's not too much variation. The Isthmus of Rivas here is the one area that has significantly older Paleocene, Eocene, and Cretaceous rocks. So that's the environmental baseline. And in addition, he got 58 samples of human dental enamel from archaeological contexts in Pacific Nicaragua, which he has also analyzed. And essentially the data seem to break pretty well into regional groups. The large area of yellow here is the quaternary. You know, this represents the mean and 2 standard deviations for vegetation samples from throughout this region. The Ometepe Island over here, the blue, which you see here, is as you can see, there's very little variability, but it falls perfectly within the range of the quaternary deposits as well. The rocks are very similar, so that's not very surprising. The Isthmus of Rivas, this area over here, as I said, is much older rocks, and as you can see, they have a substantially higher distribution of strontium 87 to strontium 86 ratios, with a mean of a little bit above 0.7055. That's the sort of the regional variability in the baseline. There were, however, 2 extremely high ratios. These are all the individual data points. And the ones that are circled here are from mangroves growing, and this one was growing at the edge of a salt marsh or a salt flat, not too far from the beach. This one was growing fairly close to that Rubén Rio site where we excavated. But they're both a lot higher than all of the other data points. And that is consistent with the fact that mangroves, you know, their roots are in briny soil in these estuaries or on the salt flat. And so they show essentially the marine strontium isotope ratio signature instead of the isotope ratio signature of the volcanic rocks that are a little ways inland from where they're growing. And so here's where here you can see the difference. So here are the, you know, Paleocene and Eocene and Cretaceous values. Those are the highest in our and vegetation other than mangroves. And then here are the others down here. And then here, way up here is the marine isotope influenced mangrove wood. And the reason the mangroves might, you know, their high values are of interest is, for one thing, one key result of the enamel analysis is that most of the enamel samples are enriched in strontium 87 relative to the local environmental baseline. And here we're showing the results from Ometepe Island, where, as I showed you before, the vegetation samples, these here, you know, have this distribution here. This is a 2 standard deviation distribution. So all, local individuals growing up locally and eating a local diet should all fall between these two lines, essentially. Again, this is two standard deviations. But as you can see, only one out of, what is it, 9, I think, of the samples actually falls, could be a local individual based on that. So, our question is it, were all of these people immigrants, perhaps from the Rivas, the Isthmus of Rivas? The Isthmus of Rivas is over here. And you can see that, several of them, at least 3 of them, are consistent with the Isthmus of Rivas, including this one with a really odd cranial deformation that you can see here. So on the face of it, this suggests that, a large fraction of the population that lived on Ometepe Island came from somewhere else, possibly the Isthmus of Rivas. But it occurred to us that there's another possible explanation, namely that people were consuming sea salt, which and therefore, in part, the isotope ratios in the enamel of their teeth is reflecting the contribution of the inflated isotope values of marine salt. And so what Chad did here is he used a model, a mixing model that was proposed by Fenner and Wright in a study of dental enamel from Tikal. And they were wondering if importation of salt from the Belize coast at Tikal might have led to the generally higher strontium isotope ratios at Tikal. And they ultimately concluded that, well, probably not, because what their modeling showed was that people would have to eat, a lot of salt for most assumptions about the amount of maize in their diet in order to inflate the values enough. But in the case, in the same model applied to the Ometepe Island case. So down here is the environmental baseline for Ometepe, and then well, let's take a look at the black line. The black line is assuming people eat, a little more than 1/2 kilogram of maize per day, locally grown maize, which should have the environmental baseline signature, isotope ratio signature. But if you mix it using the mixing model that's covered up at the bottom of my screen here, there it is. If you mix it with 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. grams of salt, of marine derived salt, you get even by 3 or 4, you get values that are consistent with many of the individuals from Ometepe Island. Only this one really, that one would require what 7 grams of salt, which is probably beyond what an individual would have been eating. So this is that one with a strange cranial deformation. So it's possible that individual, it's more likely that he or she was an immigrant. But the others, could possibly be explained by by consumption of marine-derived salt by these people on Ometepe Island. And so that brings us to the human requirements and tolerance for salt. Humans, a maize-based diet doesn't give you enough sodium in your diet. We think of salt as not really a necessary nutrient, but it is in some quantity. But an adequate sodium can come from consuming about 3.1 to 3.8 grams of salt per day. The upper tolerable limit for salt consumption is about 5.8 grams per day. And because amounts above this level can cause high blood pressure and diseases of arteries and kidneys, that's why doctors tell you to cut down on your consumption of salt, right? But as I showed, with a diet of 600 grams of maize per day, only the very highest strontium 87 to 86 ratio in the Ometepe individuals, that the value was 0.7052, would imply an excess of sodium due to salt in the diet. In other words, would imply 6 grams or more of salt in the diet. So commerce in salt produced along the coast by brine boiling is a plausible cause of the enriched isotopic values that we observed in the Ometepe Island dental enamel. So just to conclude this second portion, unfortunately, salt does not preserve in the archaeological record. So direct evidence of salt for imports from the coast does not exist, and we'll never find it. But the abundant Salcosita salt production facilities along the Pacific coast, not just Nicaragua, but also El Salvador, Guatemala, Chiapas, and so on, they clearly produce more than the mangrove zone inhabitants themselves could consume. And in Nicaragua, there are no interior salt sources, at least as far as I know. So they had to be getting their salt from somewhere. And the likely somewhere is the Pacific coast. At Brito, one of the salt production facilities was a historic period. And colonial and historic documents describe mule trains that carried salt from the coast to settlements of the interior, such as the colonial town of Granada. So essentially, I'm not sure Chad would completely agree with me here, but so I'm suggesting that the commerce in strontium 87 enriched sea salt is at least part of the explanation for the enriched strontium 87 values observed in our tooth enamel data. And incidentally, it's not just Ometepe Island. I didn't show all of the data, but the other locations from which there's Chad has enamel samples also seem to be generally higher than the local environmental baseline. Okay, so I did get to acknowledgements 2 here. Thanks to Chad and Cliff and Heather and my Nicaraguan colleagues, and NSF, 1 grant to me and 1 grant to Heather, and the Institute of Culture for permission to carry out the work. So do you want me to stop sharing my screen now? I'll open it up to questions. I don't know if I might want to go back and show something else.
Yeah, questions would be good.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Neff? I have one. I see a lot of vessels, but did you find any? I'm used to seeing in museums figurines and stuff like that out of pottery. Did you see any of that manufactured down there, or is it strictly vessels?
In the littoral zone in southern Chiapas, we did not find any figurines, despite the fact that some of the sites that we excavated, especially the early formative sites that Jimmy Daniels excavated, you might have expected to see figurines. I mean, there's a pretty they're pretty frequent in interior sites, but we did not find any in. Well, I might be wrong about that. Actually, if Jimmy's still here, maybe he can correct me. Maybe he did find some figurine fragments.
At El Castaño, there were a few fragments. There was a foot and a half of a mask of a hollow-bodied figurine, and then the little potbelly guy that looked like one of the.
That's right. That's what occurred to me as I was talking. I realized I was saying something wrong. Yeah. So yeah. So the answers are there are some figurines, especially in the early formative, but I don't think in any of the salt production sites from the middle formative on, I'm almost certain we didn't find any figurine fragments. So, you know, they were rural, you know, craft production sites. You know, that people weren't engaging in household rituals, I don't think. They were making stuff. They were consuming the mangrove wood, the fuel wood, and so on. So unfortunately, we didn't get the goodies. We got a couple of jade beads, I think. So
Does anybody else have any question?
Yeah, one question. Are there any similar sites here in California?
salt production sites. Boy, not being a California archaeologist, I don't want to say no definitively, but I
Never
don't
say
know of
never.
any. Yeah, right. Maybe. Yeah, I don't think so. Well, they wouldn't look like a site from coastal Mesoamerica in any case, because there was not nearly as much pottery produced along the coast here. But whether there are sites that have been interpreted as salt production, I don't know.
Yeah.
Looks
And-
like Peter has a question.
There's
Oh, sorry.
ethnographic information regarding salt pan between the Pavunga site at Cal State Long Beach and the Point Heron site just to the south. And in between that is a wetlands, and the ethnographic data say that both villages were utilizing that area to collect salt, but of course, there's no archaeological data to support that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, salt can be collected, you know, especially after the few weeks of dry weather, when the water level drops, it forms as a film on coastal salt marshes.
It's a Los Cerritos wetlands area, and
okay.
it's in between those two villages, and it evidently the villagers were harvesting the salt from there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I was not aware of that.
I think Peter has a question.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. It's always fascinating to listen to Hector because every paper he gives is always something new. It takes the next dimension. And this is fascinating. Okay. Where I'm sitting in Teul, it's an hour north of Guadalajara. And if you go an hour southwest of Guadalajara, there's a place called the Sayula Basin. It's a huge salt basin. And they did excavations there in the 90s, and they find huge salt factories there. In fact, the sites there that they find, there's a site called Cerritos Colorados, the red small hills or red mountains. And these red mountains refer to precisely the breakage of the salt brine heating vessels, that they break them, throw them off the edge, and they take the cake of the salt that they would be using in commerce. So the amount of salt production there makes pyramids made out of these of your brine vessels.
Yeah.
And they call these cuencas salineras in the local literature of the archaeologists. And it's fascinating because it's really intensive at around 400, 450. It's really intensive also. Okay. And that's the thing that you're talking about, how you find rims a lot. And I was thinking then of your vessels, if maybe they're breaking the rims off and keeping the base of this to keep the salt cake intact so it won't break for transport, something like that. You know, it's tremendously interesting how you're seeing that difference there, and your breaker versus waster whole problem there might have to do with the complication of moving the cake of salt itself so it wouldn't break during transport, something like that. You know?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and that actually it occurs to me that, you know, it's possible that a lot of the plumbate that is found at sites on the coastal plain and up to Isapa, you know, the vessel probably would have been of some in some demand, but they may have carried salt as well.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Oh, very interesting.
good point. Thank you. And
Yeah.
thanks for coming, Peter.
Oh, this is a fascinating thing. You always do great stuff.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Neff, and thank everybody for joining him tonight. And I'd like to present you with this
Ah,
certificate. I'll send that to you.
okay. All right.
And it's for this evening's presentation. And I just want to make an announcement for next month. Our speaker is going to be Dr. Tom Dillahay. You might know him from excavating the Monteverde site in Chile. And his title of his talk is going to be The Archaeology, Genetics, and Environments of the First South Americans. And that's going to be on November 13th. It's a Zoom only. He's going to be talking to us from his home in, I think it's Kentucky or someplace like that, Tennessee, something like that. He'll be live.
That'll be a good one.
It was an act of Congress to get him, so hopefully everybody will come. But again, thank you very much, Dr. Neff, for tonight. We really appreciate it. And I wish you lots of luck on your next endeavor down there.
Well, thank you. Thanks to all of you for your attention and for the invitation.
You're welcome.
So,
Okay, with
Okay.
that, unless anybody has any other late announcements, I will say goodnight. And to everybody, and have a happy Halloween.
yeah, right. Happy Halloween, everybody.
All right,
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
take care.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Good job.
Um,